But just as an introduction, this is Daniela Rodriguez. She is a real estate agent with Turner Brothers. She is a board member for Creative Waco and the Hispanic Leaders Network, and she's a member of the Startup Waco Advisory Council. So welcome, Daniela.
Thank you.
How are you?
Good. Happy to be here.
So first off, will you give us a brief background of yourself and your career, where you started, how you progressed to where you are now?
Sure. So we'll start real early. I was born in Bogota, Colombia. So my name is Daniela. So my primary language is Spanish. I lived there until I was 9 years old, and my mom moved us to Texas because it got really violent in South America for a little while. Still kind of violent, but so my mom is from El Paso, and she moved us to the Dallas area, and that's where I went to high school. I went to high school at a high school named Plano East. So that's where I graduated, and then I actually went back to Colombia to start what I thought was going to be my psychology degree. So that's kind of the beginning of my schooling was, okay, I'm going to go do psychology, but I want to learn it in Spanish. What a school might need, and then we would respond with like showing them through our showroom and showing them interior design, and then showing them kind of our background and knowledge, and then we would try to win those big like $1 million projects for hospitals and schools and stuff like that. And then COVID hit. And my fiance is in real estate. And so I was working in this corporate kind of commercial real estate world and decided I was going to get my real estate license. I had already been helping him with flips for houses. So we were already buying houses here in Waco and flipping them so that we could either rent them or sell them. I'm sure you guys have seen the show that's kind of popular in town. So that's kind of like the basis of it. It's not nearly as glamorous by any means, but we kind of buy distressed properties, houses that are in disrepair, houses that somebody wouldn't want to take on and buy themselves, and then we fix them up and sell them. And so through that, I was like, well, let me go ahead and be the one that sells those houses. And so that's kind of how I began my residential real estate career. And we moved here in 2021, and I've been here working in real estate ever since. And so I got lucky enough to be able to work at my job for 6 more months, and then I was able to quit it after we successfully had our first good year.
Very cool, very cool. So you kind of illustrate a point that I am trying to let these kids know about. Sometimes I think when we go into college or we get out of high school, we think we've got this whole plan lined out as to exactly what we're going to do with our life, right? And we think it's a straight path. But life gets in the way, and our career paths end up going like this. Yep. To where we are. So a perfect example of that. Well, so today we're kind of discussing the topic of negotiation, which is something that I'm sure you have dealt with not only in real estate, but also in some of your other positions, the sales, the marketing, that type of thing as well. So let's get going with some questions. Okay, so what are the most important qualities of a successful negotiator?
So in general, like negotiation is one of those funny things that I think we've all been doing our entire lives. From like talking to our little brothers and sisters about not taking our clothes to like, Mom, please let me go out till 11, or, all of those things. So I think for you guys, it's as usable now as it will be in your future. And so I think one of the main strategies there is like actually knowing your opponent. So if you know your mom and you know how she's going to act, and you know that if you do like 5 nice things for her before in order to get the yes, well, you do those 5 things. Or if your mom's not like that and you know that maybe you need to be asking her a month before to get the yes. So it's all about kind of the knowledge of if you want to call them an opponent, the person that you're trying to negotiate with. And so listening and paying attention and then educating yourself about what their wants and needs are probably, in my opinion, kind of the most important thing to know before you even get to the asking the question thing.
Okay, so then talking about listening, because you touched on that. So how do you actively listen to understand the other party's needs and concerns in a negotiation?
Yeah, so active listening is super important, and it's difficult for most people, including myself. But I think like not that whole, when you're imagining what you're going to say next in your head, you try to stop that so that you're actually paying attention to what the person is saying, because you're not trying to hear their words, you're trying to hear what's going on behind the words. And so that's emotion, that's sad or anger, or they're trying to get through the conversation quickly, or they've had a crack in their voice. So active listening isn't necessarily I'm listening to what they're saying. It's I'm listening to what's going on in the conversation so that I can then respond appropriately. And And I think that that's something, it's a funny thing, but when you're talking to people, somebody might tell you, I'm fine, but how are they telling you I'm fine? And then what was the question that they're, I'm fine, or, oh, it's fine, or, it's the difference of the inflection that you can tell. Everybody has emotional intelligence enough to know when somebody's mad, but some of us like to ignore it and move past it. That's something that's not going to work very well in active listening.
Which goes into kind of another point of nonverbal, those nonverbal cues. So if you're doing it in a negotiation, then let's touch on the nonverbal cues then. What nonverbal cues do you pay attention to when you're in a negotiation?
Sure. And it depends on the person. So like there's people that are super analytical and there's people that are emotional. And then there's some people that, that they just want to sit and talk to you and they don't want to tell you about your entire day. So I think you have to first figure out the type of person that you're talking to so that you can switch on and off. Like for me, when I go talk to clients, I'm giving myself an hour and a half anyways. So if you want to talk about your dog for 30, 40 minutes, I'll let you talk about your dog for 30, 40 minutes. But in knowing kind of how to move people from those things and watching what makes them excited, if they're getting up to show you, I go into a lot of people's houses, so they're showing me like their kitchens or their painting that they made 3 years ago or things like that. So it's looking for excitement or looking for pain points if people get choked up. If people try to rush through something, if you talk about finances and they don't want to talk about those, well, we're selling a house, that's kind of important. So I know then, trigger, I need to make sure that we sit down and talk about finances in a real serious way, maybe after this meeting. But yeah, I think it's a matter of when you get to know the person that you're communicating with, then you know which questions to ask. And then when you watch their reactions, then you really know how to get inside of their heads and inside of the actual conversation that you're supposed to be having. Because you can have a real surface conversation with somebody, but that's very unlikely going to end up in them hiring you. If you can actually leave and you've had a real conversation about they're moving because their mom's passing away and, and they're trying to pay for her cancer treatments in another state, then you understand where the pain point is. And you also understand how to communicate with them better throughout the process. So I think that's, there's people will tell you how they're feeling if you pay attention.
Again, through those nonverbal cues.
Absolutely.
and the active listening.
Along with part of the negotiation tactic for me is that there's something called mirroring. There's a book called Splitting the Difference. A real smart guy named Chris Voss, who was an FBI negotiator, wrote a book. It's not very long. I highly recommend reading it. It's on Audible. But he talks about all of these hostage negotiations that he used to do, and he compares them to these normal everyday things because they're really similar. People will act the same. There's I wrote this quote down because I read it this morning when I was thinking about y'all. And it's without a deep understanding of human psychology, without the acceptance that we are all crazy, irrational, impulsive, emotionally driven animals, all the raw intelligence and mathematical logic in the world is little help in the fraught, shifting interplay of two people negotiating. So we are all crazy people going through all kinds of life things. And for us to work with other people, we have to understand that. And we also have to just slow down enough to understand what this other animal's dealing with in order to help them.
Yeah, good. Very good point. Very good point. So talking about, I want to throw another little slightly different question in here, but what would you say are the steps in a negotiation?
Sure. Step one, get to know your opponent and do your background. So if I'm going into somebody's home, I know that they want three things. What's my home worth? How fast can you sell it? And who are you? And so I need to come in prepared. I come in with paperwork and documentation, and I come in with facts so that if somebody tells me, no, that's not true, I've got the paperwork right here to show it to them, along with I'm doing research on their neighborhood. So the first step is research. Just like if you're writing or doing homework, you can't just write about a subject that you don't know about. And I certainly can't sell about a subject that I don't know about. So for me, the first step is sitting down at my computer. Do they have a Facebook? I literally go in and do a deep dive on people if I can, if they have enough information. The internet's a wonderful thing. Use it to your advantage. And so first step, get to know your opponent, the person that you want to sell to. And then after that, it's this active listening of give yourself space and time to actually pay attention. So don't expect to go somewhere and convince somebody of anything if all you have is 30 minutes or 10 minutes. If you can't give somebody the time, then why would they give you the time? So time, and make sure that you're slow. So not trying to rush somebody through the process just because you know all the answers doesn't mean that they know the answers. So just acknowledging that you are the expert in the thing that you're talking about, and then slowing down in a way that people can understand you, and then that they can like take in the information and ask if you need to repeat things. Ask the person if they're feeling good, if they have any questions, if they'd like to go on a different topic. Don't talk at them, talk with them, would be like kind of that next.
Have that conversation.
Correct. You need to have conversation. If you're talking at people, they're going to lose interest pretty quick. And so, and then I think mirroring is really important through that. So when you're communicating with people and they're showing you certain types of, if somebody's high energy, you want to be high energy with them. If somebody's low energy, you kind of want to take a seat back. And, it's the same thing as when people are showing you around their homes. If you want to show interest in anything that they're showing you, because if they're showing you, it's because they're excited about it or they want you to see it. And so asking questions about those things. If somebody has, I saw your teacher has all these awesome superhero things. So I know that these are things that you like. And so maybe I like that too. And then I can then talk to you about it.
So finding a common ground.
Finding common ground. Yeah. And then just like it allows them to get to know you in a way that's more intimate, but that has to do with them. It's not really about you. It's about them. So you don't want to tell them about your favorite hobby if that hobby doesn't interest them. But if there's an interest that they have that you have in common, go with that. So going through the flow of this is their conversation and you're there to help them. And that ultimately, like, I think one of the things, and it was one of your questions, I might be jumping, but
that's okay. We'll jump around.
People think of negotiation as manipulation a lot, and it can be. There's a lot of salespeople that are manipulative. And so this is part of what you're wanting to stop if you are a salesperson or if you're going into any type of negotiation. Now, negotiations can happen if you're asking for a raise at work, right? So it's the same thing as if you're going, hey, I've been here for a year. You've been paying me $15. I think I deserve $18. Well, you need to go in with numbers. You need to go, like, you have to do your homework first. Then you have to go and prepare to talk to them. And then you have to hear your employer out when they're trying to tell you that you can't get it.
That active listening again.
Active listening. And then somehow you have to convince them afterwards that you're worth it and that it's worth paying you more. So in order to do that, you have to have good rapport. And the more that your employer respects you, and that if you came in with prepared, you're more likely to get that raise, even if it's not the full raise. And that's that never split the difference. If you're coming in with a good number and there's a reason for that number, then you need to stick to that number as much as possible. And life is life, and sometimes it doesn't happen, but you went in prepared, and that's like kind of the most important thing.
Very cool. And so kind of building on that just a little bit and talking about the active listening, the nonverbal cues, can you share an example of a time when active listening, when the nonverbal cues helped you achieve a win-win situation?
Sure. So at Herman Miller, it was actually like a specialty of mine. It was my favorite thing to do because we did big tours. So we would bring in CEOs from the major hospitals, right? And so American Airlines was kind of my biggest win there. We got their big headquarters in Dallas. It took 3 years to get that project and a lot of different meetings. And at the last meeting, we were the top 3. And they were meeting with all 3 of us, and they came in with their CEOs and stuff. And this is something that I learned to do throughout the showroom tours. The tours were the buildings were almost the size of like this side of the school. Mm-hmm. And you had all of this furniture, and you've got 15 people running around looking at pretty things, and their minds are everywhere. Well, my favorite thing to do would be hang back and listen to conversations. And then I would like meander my way into those conversations, because that's the way that I usually got the most insight, would be the people that were lagging in the back and not asking all these questions about the furniture and touching stuff and sitting. It was the people in the back that were talking to each other. And so I would kind of sit and listen and be like, oh yeah, by the way. And so it turns out, and it was the guy that was actually making the big decision was in the back with his CFO. And we ended up we had great rapport. And I was the one that they were coming to asking questions as we were finishing this giant tour. Well, by the end, I heard him talking about that his daughter loved an Eames chair, and it was a very special chair that we happened to have at school. And so we had allotments to give people gifts. It's kind of like a bribe, but we did have those. And so we went ahead and sent his daughter an Eames chair afterwards. And I think that was one of the, if there's a minimal differentiation between like a price and a product, well, then a kindness is going to win you the thing. It's a gift. It's a difference. And it makes, think about it when you go to like the dentist and they give you something to take home with you. You're like, oh, maybe I'll go back to that dentist. They take care of me. And so it's this whole idea of people love to be taken care of. They want to feel special. And so when you can figure out ways to make people feel special, you're very likely to win something there.
that kind of goes along with my philosophy when it comes to customer service. My background is in retail and food service management before I started teaching. And I always had the philosophy that if you take care of the people that you're working with, they're going to take care of you in one way or, some form or another.
Absolutely.
So I feel like our conversation led us to one of our other questions. And it's like, now, of course, I don't remember what it was. So I guess a little bit. So another example, can you share an example of a time when you had to adapt your negotiation strategy mid-conversation?
People get emotional and get triggered like real easily, especially when they're talking about their homes or their businesses. I help a lot of small businesses find their locations here, and there's a lot of emotion there. And so sometimes people are angry or happy or sad or they're struggling financially and they're just stressed. And so, I mean, I've been in rooms where I'm about to lose my house. Can you help me? It's 2 weeks before I lose my house. And then there's rooms of, this is my first business and I'm 20 something years old and I don't know anything. So the emotions for me are what happens a lot. And so even just last week, I was at someone's home. This was a 70-year-old male veteran who was like 6'8", had guns everywhere. He was just a different kind of guy than what I'm used to hanging out with. And so we had this really good rapport, but at one point he got really into politics and really wanted to talk about politics. And for me, it's like, it's my job not to get extreme if I'm going to win business, but there's also like my own personal views that I'm allowed to have. And so we ended up talking, me and that man were in his house for 3 hours after he got aggressively angry about something that I responded to because my last name's Rodriguez. I am an immigrant. And so he immediately realized after he said something, this might not be the right, but then he got angry. And from that anger, I was able to go, let's talk about it. And we ended up talking for an hour and a half about the politics that he obviously wanted to talk about, that he hasn't gotten to talk about. He lives at home by himself for some reason. And he needed to talk about this. He wanted just to sit and have this conversation with somebody that had a differentiating view from him. And I was able to do that for him. By the end, he gave me a hug. I've won the house. I was able to sell some land for him. Like, we're now best buddies. He messages me and he sends me things about politics, and now I'm his politics buddy. But I could have very, very, very easily, I could have been so offended that I would have left, right? And in a different time in my life, when I was younger, actually, I would have never even wanted to listen. Mm-hmm. And it's that whole thing of like, even if we have extreme differences in views, there's going to be something there. If we can find something in common, like, now we can work together. Oh wow, what a way to, like, it's just wild, right? Like, that it's really not that big of it doesn't seem like it can work that way, but it really does. And all people want to be, like, for the most part, this isn't everybody, but most people just want to be listened to. And so that's one of the ones that it's from here to here.
We want to feel heard. Yeah. I think as just general human beings, we want to be heard. Yes. And so if we can give that attention and establish that rapport, that helps us to be able to work with that person that much easier. Mm-hmm. Okay, you're telling me about telling the story about this 6'8" military guy, and his anger with the politics and everything. That goes into what I feel is another question. How do you manage your emotions and maintain composure in stressful situations or stressful negotiations like that?
It can be hard because I'm an emotional person. Sometimes you want to go in your car and cry, and people are rude, and people tell you to get out of here and whatever. And like I said, we're dealing with people's money. And so people just get frustrated and don't know what to do. And then you're the one that they're going to lash out at. Well, I've realized it's not about me. Like, it's not personal for the most part. I very regularly am dealing with clients that accidentally say things that maybe would be offensive, or don't think about some of the things that they say. And that's life, guys. Like, you're in school. This happens to you every day. Who is it hurting if you're the upset one? You. I can yell at you, but then I lose business, and then I'm upset all day because I've yelled at someone or gotten upset or emotionally charged. That doesn't mean that if somebody's gone over the edge, that I'm not allowed to say, hey, I don't appreciate the way that you're communicating with me, and I actually don't work with people that talk to me that way. Today, I'm going to have to let go of a client because of that. Mm-hmm. And so that's okay too. Like, you have boundaries. It's not just about the sale. But that there's ways of catching people and saying, did you mean it like this when you said this? And sometimes people go, like when you repeat to them what they just said, they're like, oh, I didn't mean it that way. That's not what I meant. And so I think just asking for repetition, or even just repeating it for them and going, hey, I'm understanding that you just said this thing to me. Is that right? And most of the time people are like, oh, no, I didn't mean it like that. Actually, let me rephrase that. And so we can pivot backwards just by reiterating what somebody says. It almost embarrasses people that they were the ones that said it sometimes.
Well, and it seems like that just the fact of repeating something back, it seems to me like that causes a couple of things. One, it helps with the negotiation because you're again going on establishing that rapport, but you're also being able to establish an understanding, because the way they say something, they mean it a certain way. The way you hear it, you think it of a certain way. So if you ask those clarifying questions and you restate what they're saying, it helps to establish that relationship and that understanding.
And it's that whole same thing of we're all these crazy animals, right? Like we all have different biases. We all had a day this morning. There's always going to be a reason to be triggered for anybody. And so if you can stop yourself from being triggered by communication, by just going, and it's like assumption makes an ASS out of you and me. That's the reality. Like it's just, you don't want to be the one assuming and the one that's being triggered to anger, and then that you can't focus enough to then do anything about it. I get in these situations where I get so nervous in public speaking scenarios, like I really get nervous and my mind goes blank. So I bring this so that if I go blank, I can look down and remind myself of the things that I wanted to say to you guys. I know that about myself. So I try my best not to do public speaking without some notes for myself, because I know that. So if you have anxieties or if you have things that trigger you, like study those things about yourself so that you can literally learn about yourself enough so that you can be a better you. Like that's the more you know yourself, the easier it is to get to figure other people out. And I think that that's part of why I was interested in psychology in the first place when I was young. It's that I am interested in people. And I think when people feel that, I think they're like, oh, well then maybe I can be interested too in something else or in somebody else, or I can trust her because of that. And so for me, that's my negotiation tactic, is being kind of authentic and not manipulative, with still using tactics that technically would be considered, you're learning about human behavior in a way that you're using it to your best advantage. And why wouldn't you?
Sure, it makes total sense. Okay, so what do you think what would you say is the biggest misconception people have about negotiation?
The manipulation part of it. That it's all a sales tactic. And because we live in a world of marketing, we live in a world of everybody's trying to sell you something, and everybody's something is the best thing. And we all know that they're not, And so I think the misconception is kind of a truth that can't apply to everybody or everything. And so that's where your job comes in of proving your worth by your actions. If you say you're going to call somebody, call them. If you say you're going to help somebody, help them, or don't say it at all. Like it's better to be quiet than to promise you're going to do something and not do it. So those are things like, for me, don't be the stereotype, especially like in real estate. There's my fiance's an investor, and he literally on a regular basis says, I hate realtors. They're the worst. They don't respond. And I'm like, you're what? Like that's me. And he's like, you know what I mean? And I'm like, and yeah, a lot of times I'm communicating with people. There's hundreds of people that can do jobs in this world, and not everybody's good at it. And so if you can be seen as the one that's good at it, then you start making strides there. If somebody's going through a hard time with another realtor and you're able to step in and help for free because you're willing to help, those are things people pay attention to in the community. It's just, if you're doing it for the right reasons, it ends up working out, and it just does. And then you feel good about it afterwards too. And I think that's kind of in our industry, in my industry, that's kind of the biggest misconception, is that everybody's only out for the money, because it's a commission-based job, right? So that's how it's going to work. But also because it's a commission-based job, it means I'm working that much harder to get you the most so that I can make the most. And so you can switch that verbiage.
Just switch the mindset a little bit. Rather than it being all about the money, let's make it about the person that I'm trying to help.
Correct. If you win, I win. Otherwise, I don't win at all.
Right.
And I'm so like for my business, like I pay for everything up front. No one pays for anything until the closing table. And that's one of the promises that I make. And so keep that promise, right? But Not everybody works that way. So that's like an immediate promise that I can make somebody that that's just the way that I run my business. It also shows that I have a financially stable enough business that I can do that.
Right.
So those are all things, that little bits of offerings that I already plan to do no matter what, that I tell them that I'm going to do because it's a good business tactic. So that's the other thing. Don't forget to like toot your horn. If you speak Spanish, tell them. If you know, any of the positive things, if you work in the community, like, you have to be selling yourself. Other people aren't doing the same work that you're doing to study them. They're not. So you have to do it for them. As much as you're studying them, you have to make sure that you're giving them yourself too. So.
Okay. What about ethical considerations? How important are they, or how does ethics play into negotiation?
So to me, it's in every part of the conversation. Again, it's like, if you do it the right way, then you don't have to worry about any of the other stuff. I think that in this world that we're living in, I think there's a lot of unethical things that happen. I think people feel burnt out by the unethical things that happen. They're burnt out by the world, right? And so if you can be the safe space, and if you can show that you work with integrity, and that is by communicating how integrity works in whatever business that you're in. Like for us as realtors, we are supposed to follow guidelines that the National Association of Realtors follows. Well, right now, the National Association of Realtors is in a lot of trouble because their higher ups did all of this illegal stuff. So how do I then communicate that I'm not like them? Right. And that's by doing community work. That's by being a part of the community in a way that people see me as a trusted source and advisor. Bad things are going to happen in the world if you're one of the ones that is seen as the one that's going to be honest, whether it's a deterrent to your business or not. I think people acknowledge that, and then they start sending you people because of it. I've done a lot of pro bono work in town because of the title work that happens and people losing their homes. And if somebody's grandma's about to lose their home, I'm not charging her. We're going to help her with the hopes that at some point grandma's going to have another friend that's going to sell their house. And that's worth it to me to help our community, but also like it helps both ways. It helps me feel good. It helps me do community work, and it helps my business. So it's like holistic in that where it's a win-win-win to be a good person and to do things with integrity. I think it's a win, and I think it's a win for our community, especially in a world where a lot of people get pats on the back for doing things the wrong way just to make more money. Mm-hmm. So to me, that's a huge part of being a trusted advisor. And that's a word that I like to use, that I've used all throughout all of my careers, because if people don't trust you, you don't really have you don't have a business in sales.
Or pretty much in anything, right. Or in life, yeah, even.
Exactly.
So
you're not going to get invited to speak at a school, that's for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so have you ever walked away from a negotiation? And if so, why?
I have. I have usually, whether sometimes people aren't the right fit for each other. If I feel like there's aggression or I feel unsafe, I'm not going to stick around. And so that's the other thing for yourself, especially as if you ever decide to work in a commission-based job or where you're mostly by yourself, like safety, you have to think about your safety. As a woman, I think about my safety. So any time that I feel unsafe, I say no, or I invite somebody to join me, or I go to a public place. And then also just if somebody isn't willing to listen to my advice, right? So I've been doing this. I've got a 10-year career in different parts of real estate. If you're hiring me but don't trust me, and you're constantly, going to, maybe if you're calling other realtors and we've got an agreement signed. And so I'm like, you know what, if you feel like you know better, or if you feel like another realtor would serve you better, I'm releasing you from our contract, because I'm either your trusted source or I'm not. I'm either the one you're working with and that you're going to listen to and that we're going to go through the process of a contract, or I'm not. So specifically when people choose to go and not communicate, like if they're not communicating with me, and or if they do things that are against the contract that we set up front, which is something that I talk about as well. You have an upfront contract. You talk about all of the things that are expected, like answering your phone when I call you, because we're in the middle of a contract that is time sensitive. So if I haven't heard from you in a week, and I have your house for sale and we're under contract and we're supposed to sell it next week, and I haven't heard from you, that means that you're no longer in contract with me. And we can both lose that way. There's legalities there and all kinds of things that like I can get in trouble for if you're not communicating. So I set all of those things up front. Hey, once we go through these processes, you have to answer my phone calls. Mm-hmm. You have to be available. You have to communicate with me and be honest. about your finances, about your mom moving in, about your whatever's happening in your life, we have to talk about it, because if you hide it and we figure it out later, then all of it deteriorates and none of us win, and then both of us wasted 3 months of our lives to not get a house sold.
Because there's no trust, there's no rapport. Right, exactly.
Right. And that's my job as well up front, is getting to know somebody well enough and setting expectations well enough for both of us, that we both know how we're supposed to behave throughout the process of the contract.
So to kind of sum up just a little bit, here's what I get from when it comes to negotiation. You need to be self-aware, for one.
Mm-hmm.
You know, your own abilities, your own strengths, what you do best. You have to do your research, know your client, be able to find common ground so that you can be able to establish that rapport with that client. Setting expectations so that both parties know what to expect. Because my personal belief is that frustration comes from unmet expectations.
Absolutely.
So if you don't have those expectations set up front, you're going to get frustrated, you're going to get angry, and things can deteriorate from there. So if you got that as expectations, you eliminate all of that. And then not necessarily looking at it on the money side of it, but what can I do to help you in that case? Anything that you would add?
No, I mean, I think in general, it's not everybody wants to be a salesperson, but everybody is. So I never thought that I'd be in a full commission job. That's just not, I didn't see myself being there. But if you like the idea of being independent, if you think that you have like the capacity to manage your own schedule, and if you don't, get a job that helps you with that. That's what my last job helped me to do, was to learn how to manage myself. I wouldn't have been able to do what I do now without my last job. So that there's steps there. You're not just going to get to this like ideal situation, whether that's going to school or not. It doesn't have to be school, but put yourself in situations where you're learning, not just where you're like easily making money, but where if you're interested in something, go get a front desk job, go do a mail job at a real estate office or at an architect's office or whatever it is that you think you're interested in at a hospital, and start learning so that you know one way or the other if you're even interested in it. Because a lot of people think that they're interested in things, and then they start working there after they finish college and realize, oh my God, this is not for me. So for like, get to know yourself, and you're going to continue to change, and it's going to be constant, and it's just not going to stop. And so like, just be fluid and get to know yourself and the things that you enjoy doing and are good at. Those things are the things that are going to ultimately make you money.
Very cool. Very cool. So we've only got a little less than 10 minutes before this class ends. So I want to open it up to you guys as to what questions do you have, either about negotiation, about Daniela herself, her career, what she does. It's open to you.
So you said you flip houses, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is like I've been wondering, like, once like you find a house, right? Do you like pay it fully?
So we pay it.
I pay it fully and then I'll flip it and sell it.
Yeah, so it belongs to us so the fear of renting it is that it doesn't belong to you and you're putting money into it. So you're giving somebody else the ability to kind of come in from the back and take away all the work that you did on it. So unless maybe it could be an uncle or a family member that you could maybe do a contract with and then fix the house up, would be the only way that I would minimally recommend renting or something like that. There's loans and different types of processes that you can do where you don't have to have all the money up front. Waco actually is doing all kinds of teaching about, they want to give locals the ability to do it on their own. And so you can call somebody like me and we can walk you through the process. And if you have somebody like a mentor that knows how to do flips, we can connect you with some people to help you flip a house. But there's a few different ways to buy one where you don't have to have all the money up front. But a lot of people pay cash up front or do something where you go through a lender. And so you go and you borrow money, just like when you would with a credit card. You have to have a certain amount up front. You have to have certain credit. So there's certain parameters there, but there's absolutely ways for people to get them with pretty low money down, and then you flip it, and then you sell it for the difference. And that's part of that like learning curve of what do I spend? And that's kind of why the city's kind of starting some of these programs. There's a really cool program in Philadelphia that actually Startup Waco is thinking about mimicking here. That's exactly that. So if you're interested in something like that, let us know. Because I think that there's use for something like that here. There's a lot of old houses in Waco. So, and part of our goal here is to like make sure that it's not being bought just by people from the outside and not just investors. we want it to be done by people that are local, and that then you learn a trade and you can continue to do that in whatever town you decide to live in. So,
Okay.
yeah.
What other questions?
Have you ever mentored anyone?
Yes, I have actually. Since I've been in Waco, I think I've only had two interns, but in Dallas I had a lot. And so we hired from the colleges and from the high schools. But if you guys are interested, just contact me and we'll chat about what the options might be, maybe in the summer or something like that. So when it comes to real estate, it's funny, like mentoring's weird because until you're kind of studying for it, you're not allowed to do a lot. You have to have the license. And so, but what I can help with is showing you how to do that, and then I can show you the office and my marketing stuff. Like, there's a lot of things that you can learn that you don't have to have the license for. But in order to go to houses or do anything with clients, you would have to be with a licensed realtor. But yeah, I like to mentor. Mm-hmm.
What other questions? None? Okay. Any other final comments, final words, Daniela?
Not really. I mean, I think I'm like trying to remember what I wanted to say, but I think, wait.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think in general, you guys are in high school, like starting to think about what's going to happen next is super important. And we were just talking about this. Like, I wish that I'd thought about it more when I was a senior and a junior. Life happens fast. And your 20s go by fast, and then you're 35, and then you're 50, and so it's the idea of like, remember that there's a lot of places for you to go, and that like you don't have two options for jobs, and that if you're interested in something, if you look hard enough, there's usually somebody that's going to be willing to help you work in that capacity in some way. There's all kinds of programs through your schools. There's all kinds of programs through startup. And then there's also just opportunities through the chambers in your own communities or through your neighborhood associations and things like that. For me, half the jobs I've ever gotten and half the wins I've ever had are through the people that I know. And so don't be afraid to like ask for help and ask for the next best step. But also, if you're going to ask for it, you have to be ready to follow through. If you're not, then, I've had lots of people call me and ask for help, and they come once and then we don't hear from them again. And that's okay. But if you're ready to do a little bit of extra work or show up just to learn, and that is noticed. That's noticed by people in the community, and it's noticed by coworkers, and it's noticed by your teachers. So if you're looking for a little change and for a little direction, that's how I would recommend going about it, is be a part of your community.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right. Daniela, thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.